Have you ever been watching a film, a military drama, or a cockpit thriller, and noticed that nobody on screen ever says yes? The pilot doesn't say yes. The soldier doesn't say understood. The astronaut doesn't say got it. Instead, they say one word, precise and clipped, that lands with the confidence of a full sentence. Roger. Or sometimes, Roger that. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small question forms that you've never quite bothered to chase down. Why that word? Why not any other? Your brain files it away as radio jargon, the kind of professional shorthand that exists because experts prefer sounding efficient to sounding normal. But the word has been nagging at English speakers for the better part of a century now, crossing from military radio into aviation, into space exploration, into police procedurals, into casual office sarcasm, without anyone ever really explaining where it came from or why it stuck. Across every branch of the military, every commercial airline, and every space agency operating today, this single syllable is exchanged millions of times. It is arguably the most widely spoken word in the history of professional communication, understood instantly in dozens of languages without translation. And the person it sounds like it's named after never existed. But here's the surprising truth. Roger was never a name. It was a letter. One letter, chosen for a specific technical reason during a specific moment in history, that survived 3 phonetic alphabets, the entire Second World War, the space race, and Hollywood, to end up being used ironically in text messages by people who have no idea they're quoting a Morse code operator from the early 20th century. Today, we're unpacking where Roger actually came from, why it outlived the system that created it, and what it reveals about how language survives long after the technology that invented it has disappeared. To understand this properly, you have to start not with radio, but with the problem radio was trying to solve. In the final decades of the 19th century, long-distance communication meant telegraph cables, either buried underground or stretched across ocean floors at extraordinary expense and engineering effort. Morse code, the system of dots and dashes that traveled along those cables, had developed its own shorthand over decades of use. Operators who spent their days tapping out messages developed abbreviations for the most common phrases, shaving fractions of a second off every transmission. Among the most useful was the single letter R, which in telegraphic shorthand meant received. Message understood. Nothing further required. It was clean, universal among operators, and required exactly one character to transmit. When wireless radio emerged in the early 20th century, those same operators brought their habits with them. R meant received on the telegraph. It meant received on the radio. The convention transferred without anyone deciding to transfer it. Then the technology changed again, and the problem changed with it. Early radio transmitted Morse code well enough, but as voice transmission became practical through the 1920s and 30s, a new difficulty emerged that nobody had fully anticipated. The human voice over early radio equipment was unreliable in ways that dots and dashes were not. Signals faded. Static swallowed syllables. A single spoken letter, R, could vanish entirely into interference, or be misheard as any of half a dozen similar sounds. In high-stakes environments, saying a letter that might be misunderstood was worse than saying nothing at all. The solution was the phonetic alphabet, a system in which every letter of the alphabet is represented not by its name, but by a complete, distinct word chosen specifically because it sounds like nothing else. The word for R in the phonetic alphabet used by Allied military forces during the Second World War was not Romeo, which is what it became later. It was Roger. Think of it like the difference between shouting the number 7 across a noisy room and shouting the word 7. One is a sound. The other is an unmistakable word with its own shape in the mouth, its own rhythm, its own resistance to being swallowed by noise. Roger was chosen because it worked. It was 2 syllables with a hard consonant at each end, difficult to confuse with any other word in the alphabet, audible through static that would have eaten a single letter alive. So, if Roger simply meant the letter R, and the letter R meant received, why did it survive long after R stopped meaning Roger? The answer, as is often the case in history, comes down to the particular weight that wartime habits carry into peacetime. During the Second World War, Allied radio communication was conducted under conditions of extraordinary pressure. Pilots in combat couldn't afford ambiguity. A misunderstood instruction over a cockpit radio could mean a collision, a missed target, or a pilot flying into fire intended for someone else. The phonetic alphabet was drilled into every operator, every pilot, and every radio controller until it was instinctive. Roger, meaning received, was repeated thousands of times a day across every theater of the war. By the time the conflict ended and the surviving operators, pilots, and soldiers returned to civilian life, the word was not jargon. It was muscle memory. The phonetic alphabet was subsequently standardized across NATO in the 1950s, and R officially became Romeo. Roger was retired from the alphabet. But it had already detached itself from the alphabet entirely. It no longer meant the letter R. It meant received directly in its own right, and no amount of official standardization could reach back into the habits of hundreds of thousands of trained personnel and replace a word that worked. It spread instead from military aviation into civilian aviation, from pilots into air traffic controllers, from controllers into emergency services, and from emergency services into popular culture. By the time Hollywood started putting it into the mouths of fictional soldiers and astronauts, it had already completed its journey from technical shorthand to cultural shorthand. There is one more distinction worth understanding, because in the environments where precision actually matters, these words are not interchangeable. Roger means received. It tells the sender that the message arrived intact. It carries no commitment. Copy carries a slightly stronger implication, suggesting the message has been noted or recorded. Wilco, a contraction of will comply, is the word used when acknowledgement also means agreement and intent to act. In a cockpit or a command center, using the wrong one of these is not a stylistic error. It is a communication failure with potentially serious consequences. The fact that the broader culture has collapsed them all into vague synonyms for yes is a sign of how completely Roger has left its technical origins behind. So the next time someone says Roger that in a meeting room, or you see it typed in lowercase in a group chat as a joke, you'll know what's actually being said. A Morse code abbreviation from the 1800s passed through the voice radio operators of the 1920s, formalized by wartime necessity into a phonetic alphabet, officially retired in the 1950s, and still somehow here, unchanged, more than 100 years after the telegraph operator who first tapped out a single R to mean message received. Language is full of fossils. Most of them you say every day without knowing it.